Welcome to Fullmetalrpg. This is Richie Buzzkill. Here is a solo mission tonight. I figured there was some things on my mind, the things I've been doing. Figured I'd ask the patrons to give a little questions. We'll go through all this and see maybe a state of Fullmetalrpg. But yeah, we'll see if we can have a little conversation. Little thought from myself to you. So if you have any reactions, please come on the Discord, hit me up on all the things. Love to hear you from you. So first of all, I've been sort of thinking about running a sci-fi game. And this is sort of one of those things it's been sort of driving me to look at different systems over the last 6 months or so, trying to come up with what I want to do. Originally, I was thinking about running Star Trek Adventures, but I'm still hesitant to run anything with kind of the military structure that Starfleet would require. Now, admittedly, it's very loose, and going rogue is sort of de rigueur for a lot of that. But and I'm sure that they have. I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure they have systems kind of in place for that sort of work. But really, what gets my thoughts bubbling is kind of The Expanse, right? And that's probably for a couple reasons. One, it's more of a hard science fiction. Now, there are some things about The Expanse that are out of our understanding of physics, but nothing is like truly impossible. And I thought maybe, and from what the rumor I always heard is The Expanse was based upon a role-playing campaign that the authors had run. Well, that sort of always kind of tingled my brain, and I really, really enjoy the show, and I miss it. And there are good reasons why they ended it. But I thought I might start with looking at the original, the OG Traveler system as something. I mentioned this to some people, and they're like, "Oh, well, they really liked it." But I'd never interacted with them. It's nothing anybody had ever put in front of me, or I've never actually gotten a chance to play it. So I got the Traveler book, the basically kind of, we'll call it like 1.5. They collected the initial pamphlets into the Traveler book, and I started reading it, and the tone was very interesting. It's more of a like, what if Rome was in space kind of feel. Now, it doesn't do that as much as when you look at 40K or some of these other but it kind of even says that in the kind of introduction, is it's supposed to feel like this kind of like, that they don't have, communications take time, and your traveling takes weeks, and it's supposed to be this, and all the characters have been conscripted in one way or another before you start playing, at least originally, and then eventually they kind of expanded to have more civilian options. But initially you have these kind of military backgrounds before you retire and become a character, right? And so I said, sure. I looked at the character creation. It's very interesting. You can die in this character creation like every time you, so you, like I said, everybody is conscripted or enlisted. You then go ahead and every term of service you would try to re-enlist, but you basically have a chance of dying every time you roll these dice, which is an interesting choice. And they even say that there's a little controversy in there, and you could switch to being harmed in some way, some permanent way, if you roll that. But the Saturday Night Crew, shout out to Noland and Showalter and Kayla and, Woodfin and Bill. We decided, I was like, oh, let's just run character creation and see what kind of characters come out of this, how evocative these characters were. And we did that, and there was some interesting outcomes. I mean, but it didn't really, it didn't create really that interesting a character, really. And then I started reading the skill section for this, and now I know that, modern games have these like stat plus skill plus D something, right? Or percentile roll under. So this is before kind of that was a thing. There's a target, you're rolling generally 2d6, and the target number is generally 8. But sometimes having a skill doesn't give you any bonus to that roll. Sometimes it just allows you to make that roll. Like you would instantly fail if you were not skilled in that thing. But it varied from skill to skill. And as I read deeper into it, I felt like it was so overwritten, and it was so... It was one of those things where, like, to run it properly, I feel like you would have to almost read it like the Bible, like where those people that are devoted to reading a text every day and trying to parse some section of that text in order to fully understand what and get meaning out of that section for themselves. Like, you're not necessarily good. They didn't write, they didn't really write that section with the intent of maybe having a rule in it, but there was some kind of intent that they wanted to give you. Like, it is kind of an game, but it tends to want to give you more or less than you would ever need. And when we went, I was like, well, I mean, they had a few 100,000 credits, and they were like, oh, well, maybe you can buy a ship for this. And started looking around, and there was no table with the cost of ships. And then I started looking at the rules to create ships and like how to finance ships. And eventually, after, we're talking and I'm looking up and I'm searching the internet, there's no chart on the internet for this. And I was like, I eventually found out how much these ships were. And the cheapest one was like 20 million credits. So they didn't even have a down payment for a ship, which means as player characters, they're just going to steal a ship, right? But it doesn't even state that in the rules. Like, they got like tickets on flights. You could just kind of start there and see if you could roll into them getting a ship. But it really felt like, as a game master, I would have had to have bequeathed something to them in order to kind of get the feel. Or I would have said they're all, like on the Expanse, they're all on a mining ship, or they were all merchants. They all got the same service, the merchant marines or whatever you want to call them. And I would have had to have given them the opportunity to steal a ship and then deal with the consequences, which is a fine story, but it felt like the story wasn't of my choosing as the game master, the story was coming from this kind of void in what I read. Now, I of course didn't read the whole book because it was just my eyes started to glaze over as I started reading this book. Like I said, I almost had to read in sections and kind of like ponder what was going on there. So I've kind of moved on from the idea of Traveler. Now, maybe I come back to Mongoose Traveler, one of the later versions, at some point, just to check it out, right? Because I think there's some really cool seeds here. But when you have travel that's based on the square root of certain variable numbers and hexadecimal character stat arrays, it's written for a very particular audience that I think still exists. There's a small audience that still exists, but it was a very particular time in the, when people had time to deal with this sort of thing. So I have kind of moved on from there. I think I would like to try. I went and I found that there was an Expanse RPG, and we'll talk more about. I'll talk more about kind of licensed games here in a little bit, but I'm gonna try and really dig deeper on Death in Space, which is a newer game from Stockholm Cartel. To see if that's this feeling. While I think I should be getting the Expanse book here pretty soon. And that's sort of where I'm at right now. Like, yes, I have I could run it in Cyberpunk. I could run it in any, Savage Worlds or anything else. But I kind of just want to see if I could find a system where it was like supporting what I wanted to do, as opposed to try and like just wing it as much as I normally do. Because a lot of times when I'm running, like I'll get something down and then I'll close the book and I'll just wing whatever the next thing is. And I think that's, to me, it fits my style, and I'll still have to do that because there's no way I'm going to be sitting there at the table and like flipping through the pages and trying to get something from that, kind of. But I would like to say have some of this stuff already figured out for me. It's just a different flavor than what I've been running. So that's kind of like where I'm at with that, the science fiction game. I want to do that more readily. And I really have this like deep need to kind of run something different than the old fantasy games. I mean, I loved running Morkborg. Cyborg, I'm looking forward to getting the physical book and maybe playing some more. But that's a very specific type of story. I mean, you can play science fiction anywhere, right? You can play fantasy anywhere. Like Star Wars is fantasy, really. But it's wrapped in this veneer of science fiction. And, I do like a Reese cup, delicious, delicious Reese cup. So that's where that's at. Also, another Saturday night, Paul, shout out Paul, decided he wanted to create D&D characters a little different. And he decided to try and mix, speaking of chocolate and peanut butter, mix Fiasco and Dungeons and Dragons. Now, you may think, well, that's a weird chemical concoction, but I think the way that you do this is in character creation. So trying to use the character creation engine of Fiasco to create situations, because let's be honest, most D&D characters, they end up being this very like blank slate, or very informed by the world building fiction as you go along, or they've read in whatever setting book. But in this, you're creating these connections between, and they have the kind of like bond system in 5th edition, but it's kind of weak. Like there's nothing, it doesn't have a lot of teeth. It doesn't have a lot of like really interesting, it's a suggestion, right? And it's the same with Fiascos. Fiasco, or all role-playing prompts are really suggestions, but when you're dealing with these kind of more spicy interactions and wants and needs, and versus the backgrounds and the flaws and stuff, flaws and bonds from D&D. D&D has it's a very flat feel for the character background. Like it doesn't give you any kind of like, there's no hooks. It's just very flat, where Fiasco is all hooks. The whole thing is a bloody hook. Every single table and chart, the way these are written, and this, I think we did the Fiasco character creation before we're going to make characters. So next week we're going to actually play these characters. He tried it where they made characters, and then with some in person did some this Fiasco after that. And I think he tried it both ways. And I think, to me, for my money, I'd much prefer to do the Fiasco part first and the D&D part second. And at some point we'll have Paul on here, and maybe if after the experiment's over, to really deep dive on how that went for both groups. That's always one of my favorite, because I love science, so I feel like doing the experiment twice at once is always an interesting experiment. I did this once with the Cyberpunk 2020 game. I was running 2 Cyberpunk 2020 games where I started with the exact same seeds, the exact same neighborhoods. I ran both groups through this, and it led to completely different places. And that was really quite enjoyable. It was like, and I could use, and I did cross-pollinate. This is not a perfect scientific experiment, obviously, because people are involved, and I'm not a true scientist, right? I don't have a control group. But it was interesting, kind of like which direction each group kind of went to, and where the end of each party led. So yeah, that was kind of that was fun. Let me go with, I asked the patrons, like, since I'm doing this solo show, if they have anything they would like to hear me ramble on about, and a few of them took me up on that. So the homie Mike Marines, one of the best OGs here in town, asked. He's been hearing a lot of good buzz regarding the One Ring 2nd edition, right? But how about hits and misses with various licensed IPs as translated to RPGs? And I think, as someone whose first RPG was West End Star Wars 2nd edition, I have a long history of loving and hating IP based RPGs. So I love West End Star Wars. I feel like West End Star Wars saved Star Wars. I mean, there's a lot of the new canon that depends on the legends that were created in the West End Star Wars books. Like, it really reignited Star Wars at a time when no one gave a shit about Star Wars. Like the late 80s, like Star Wars was over, was done. Like people had enjoyed it. There was nothing new coming out. There were no books. This was before the Thrawn trilogy. This was before the crazy amount of novels that were put out. And there's a lot of interesting stuff that was never really even explored in the novels or the movies or anything else that, you know, is being kind of subtly kind of put back. And it's very interesting, but that's not all RPG, you know, intellectual property RPGs, right? Because you have, you know, I feel like there's two categories, and you never quite know till you start reading it. There's the category that people are just like so big a fans, so in love with the original thing that they would have written this anyways. They just may not have made any money on it. Like the Weston Star Wars people, they were clearly gigantic fans and knew what made Star Wars good. Unlike a lot of people that may work at Disney. Anyways, but there are those, like another one of my favorites, which was the Marvel superheroes from the 1980s. Yes, it's too crunchy by half, but it's still feels like a Marvel comic book. When you play that game, it feels like a Marvel comic book. It doesn't make any sense half the time. Some of the things are too powerful. But that's Marvel, right? The Marvel comic books have always been kind of like, oh, we're big and tough, and then something else happens and it shifts everything, and then you reset, right? But they have not been able to make a Marvel superheroes RPG that hits that hard since then. And I think that's really comes down, not that they weren't fans, but I feel like most of these are cash grabs, including the latest one, where they had just the wrong idea of how superheroes work, right? That they don't quite understand, and they always make it too crunchy because they're trying to get this wide variety of power, right? But they always make it too crunchy when you have this kind of like anything is possible is what the feeling should be in kind of a Marvel comic. It's just that intangible thing, and they have yet to hit it again. I really feel like they're missing it. Like if you look at like the way Masks is built, where there is no real death, so much as like, you know, going out of the fight and there's emotions. It's more of a drama system than a hit point slug 'em up system. And I think that's closer to what modern superheroes are. Is this kind of like, it's really the soap opera of is what is really drawing people. I mean, the fights have to be amazing, but you can have amazing fights without stats, right? There's always, but the amazing fight is almost always at least led up to, or in part have some emotional content to it. And that's more the modern thing. And I'm interested to see how the Avatar, last Airbender role-playing game goes. And it's the same company as Masks. And I'm assuming, you know, Magpie knows what they're doing. And they've chosen their favorite system. And I feel like that's going to be a thing that will work. But it's either it's a cash grab they've got, or they're people that are in love with the IP and are willing to and understand it. Now, admittedly, most IPRPGs are cash grab because almost none of them are, these are not something that you're going to get right away from a company that's the original stakeholder, right? I mean, like even Die, the comic book, they just recently kickstarted an IP RPG, and that's based on the comic book, which was based on a game that they sort of fictionally designed for that comic book. So there are some of these things that just kind of like line right up, and then there are things that just never quite gel into what they should be, like the Marvel RPGs after Marvel superheroes. But maybe that's just the nostalgia, nostalgia being a hell of a drug, kicking in. So I think that there's an interesting, there's a lot of more interesting IPRPGs coming out now than in, there were the days of 3rd edition and the OGL where everybody and their brother was just pumping out a D20 version of whatever the system was. And to me, even the Star Wars systems that came out during that time were kind of terrible. I think keeping levels out of Star Wars is one of my great Don Quixote-like moments. Is like, there are no levels in Star Wars. It's keeping that anything is possible in Star Wars alive, right? The lowly rebel pilot, yes, he's got like force powers, but he barely does even know what he's doing, and it can happen. The force wills it, right? That keeping that possibility alive is very important. So I think every IP I can think of has had a hit and a miss. Some of them are still waiting for their hits, I suppose, but we will, I'm sure on a long enough timeline, we will get another amazing Marvel RPG. Because they're never going to stop. Like, it's never going to not be that. So, anyways, and then we got the homie Wolfmungus. He asks any new RPGs or adventures on the horizon that you're excited about. And to be fair, I have not been seeing a lot that I'm super excited about. I guess I mentioned, Avatar: The Last Airbender sounds interesting. I liked the show, but I don't necessarily feel like I need to play in that world. Die, the comic book RPG, sounds very interesting. Meta to the point where I'm even interested even in a fantasy RPG, but it seems like the golden age, which we have been living through, has sort of slowed to a crawl. Now we still have these giant Kickstarters that happen. We still have, but it seems like I have not been hearing a lot of new interesting things happening. And I'm sure that they're out there. And maybe that's just because I've not been looking, or the revolution has moved on, that I'm not paying enough attention to itch.io releases. I have plenty of them, but I haven't been keeping up on the latest things. So those are kind of, and that's kind of where I'm at right now about that. And I don't really, if you know of something new and upcoming that sounds really exciting, let me know. Because it just could be that I'm in a bit of a slump, or a bit of a, I've got all the things I need. What more do I need right now? And there's always more. I mean, you know about my giant bookshelf and my penchant for collecting and that sort of thing. So I would, I'd like to know. I'd like to know if there's something new on the horizon that I've missed. Um, so, all right, and then Noland, uh, good friend Dan, says solo episode, solo games. Have you ever played a solo journaling game? Do you have any thoughts or opinions on them? And I do. I have. I played a couple, and I think, and this is a discussion we even had on the Discord, is you have. I feel like you need to. They are what you bring to them. It's like the cave in Star Wars. If you bring your lightsaber to the cave, it's awesome and weird, and dark shit happens, right? If you bring nothing to the cave is just a creepy cave with a snake in it. And by that I mean, when you're playing a solo RPG, it is what you bring to it most of the time. I've played some of these kind of like OSR inspired ones, and it really is what you bring to it. Now, Under a Bridge mentions the best one I've played is 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. I've not played too many. And I've been meaning to pick up 1,000-Year-Old Vampire for a while now. We've had many discussions of vampire on this channel, and I'm a great fan of the vampire genre. And so I picked it up and I started reading it, and I was instantly hit with how good it was. And so I plan on going through and doing that as an exercise of playing 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. If you would like me to maybe record some of that, I could do so. Now, a good friends of mine over at Game State already kind of did that. You should check out that if that you can find a Game State 1,000-Year-Old Vampire somewhere on YouTube or RSS near you. But the podcast, I believe, is over. But I believe that stuff is still up somewhere. And it was really intriguing. So I think that it is Choose Your Own Adventures were one of my favorite books as a kid. I just devoured them whenever I could get a hold of them. And I couldn't get a hold of them very often because I didn't have a lot of money for the book fair. So I only got to get them secondhand or from the library or whatever, which to be fair, books should mostly be gotten from the library, because are you going to really read them more than once? Don't look at my giant bookcases of other books other than RPGs. So I feel like it needs to be somewhere closer to a novel if you want more story out of it, unless you're going to bring something to it. A lot of the games I've played, if you didn't bring start bringing a story with you, you were just kind of rolling dice and playing kind of a tactical game against this algorithm that was the game, which is fine if that's what you enjoy, but it didn't compel me to really play that for the long term. So that's where I'm at on solo games. I think they're very interesting. I think it is a space that will be explored, and I think I heard that there might be a podcast that's about solo games that might pop up here and there sometime soon. So that brings us kind of to the end of the topics I had, except for one, which was the state of Fullmetalrpg. And somewhat this is the state of me, really, because everyone is sort of stepped back. I still have plenty of people that are volunteering to be on the show. Shout out to Alan. I really appreciate you volunteering, but I had some things on my mind, and I felt like since it was a bit late, I'd rather just record this myself. So we'll have Alan Barr back on the show relatively soon with a new topic and something interesting from him. Always interesting when we talk to Alan. So, and you'll hear a lot of hesitation from me on this, but it's been harder than I expected to do this myself. And I don't know what it was, but it just having people to talk to about this stuff constantly, or having active participants really kind of helped motivate me. Or it was being I guess I'm better as a team person than I am myself, but I seem to be, people seem to enjoy what I'm doing right now. And if you don't enjoy what I'm doing, I'd like to hear about it. I'd like to know what my failings are. With the Patreon is sort of like continuing to kind of trend downwards in recent months. And I understand. I mean, we are probably heading into a recession, so I understand that if you need to back off or stop, but it does help motivate me to know that you're willing to give me a few shekels a month to continue this great work that was started by Brendan and Ben and Adam, and continuing on with me and Ashley and Daryl, and then me, and then Gabe and Malcolm also benefit. We'll have another episode from them relatively soon. I need to poke those two rascally OSR gents, and I really enjoy having them talk enthusiastic about things that they're enthusiastic about, and that's really what our Fullmetalrpg is about. Is kind of finding those conversations and having, like the back of the store enthusiastic conversations, and learning from each other, and growing and expanding, and seeing where we can take this hobby of ours, role-playing games. So I have a story, and this is a story that sort of has been alluded to, and we've sort of been hesitant to tell this story, but we had what I will call the most enthusiastic troll we've had. There was a guy who created a Reddit based around Fullmetalrpg. Now, we're not Reddit people. We're just not. But he decided to start blogging each episode. And I think it was because we had banned him from the Facebook page that I think he was so mad and in love with Brendan. Because that's my other theory, is I think he was in love with Brendan. Because as soon as Brendan stopped being on the show, he went away. And I think he was so incensed by Brendan's take on politics that he decided that it would take it upon himself to change Brendan's mind. And let me tell you, that is not an easy task, no matter who you are. But why would I want to change Brendan's mind? But it was very interesting for a while. It was this thing where we didn't really want to feed the trolls, and there were some people from our friend group who found this and kind of went in swinging. And I wouldn't suggest anybody do that, even with the being a dead. It's still on Reddit, but it's just frozen in time. Now, if someone was a fan of the show and wanted to start posting on there, because Reddit is one of these weird things where they don't like the content creators to own their own subreddits. So I can't really do anything about this. But if someone was to go on there and just start if you're a Reddit person, not a Discord person, and just started to talk about RPGs in general and just kind of like anti-trolling, as I like to call it, where you just start doing the thing. I wouldn't necessarily engage with the person behind this, though we did figure out who he was, I believe, because we did ban him from Facebook. And we kind of put 2 to 3 to 4 together and figured it out. But and I'm assuming it's a he because that's who we found on on Facebook. But he spent a lot of time deconstructing our episodes in a way that is, very much the same old attacks you would get from anybody that was not interested in our outlook of inclusion and economics. Though, I have different opinions than everyone else, and we can have proper conversations here on the show. You just can't have those conversations in text. Like, it's just not possible. So it was an interesting time last year when we were getting these like multi-page reviews of the show. I mean, honestly, he probably spent more time than we did recording the show on writing this outline of what we were talking about and then trying to dissuade people from what we were saying. But I wouldn't say post on any of those posts, but I want, he put our name at the top and I couldn't do anything about that. And, Reddit won't do anything about it. And I thought about leaving it dormant, and I should cut this out of this episode, but I really feel like it was one of those things that's just been weighing over the whole enterprise. And so I just wanted to talk about it for a minute because, last summer we were actually, going on gangbusters and sort of at kind of the height of the new era of the show. And, since then, and I think the world has started to kind of come back. I think everybody's had more time to do other things. So I think we seem to be getting kind of, maybe I'm feeling like I'm waxing in my enthusiasm a little bit. And maybe that's just other parts of my life kind of bleeding over and not having time, but I still appreciate having patrons and friends, even, and the Discord. And I really enjoy having the conversations on the show. I'm always hyped after a show. I'm always really kind of having fun when I'm doing the show. So I'm hoping that kind of talking more about some of the things that, there's still some other things that I'd like to talk about, but I need to figure out, maybe write out what I really want to say about them. Because that was a bit of a ramble, and I really appreciate you listening to this solo episode. If you want to be a part of the Patreon, you want to keep me motivated, or even if you just share the show with one other person. Having you as a patron would be amazing. Whatever you can do is great. And I can do amazing things like I'm sending the patrons a set of dice, each one of them that fills out the form that I linked on the Patreon or on the Discord. I will send them a set of dice, set of D6s I had custom made from Chessex with the Fullmetalrpg logo as a thank you for keeping me around in your life. Because I feel like people that listen to this show and really feel what we feel are really our friends. I'm sure that I've interacted with a good number of you, but if I haven't interacted with you, just drop me a line. If you want to hit me up at Fullmetalrpgbiz at gmail.com. You don't like Discord, you don't like Facebook, you don't like Patreon, hit me up there. And if there's some other way you want to contribute, let me know, and I can figure that out for you. And but if you just review the show, we haven't had a review in since I restarted season 4. So hit me up with reviews where you're reviewing. I looked around to see if there were any. There weren't any. Let me know how I'm doing, even in a public space. Or send me an email. Hit up the link tree to look at the designs of the t-shirts on the t-shirt site. I'm hoping to have another one here soonish, but we'll see. So I really, really, really appreciate you. And if you ever need anything, let me know. Thank you. Good night. Rah!